Hey, In2Picklers, Tony coming to you today from the studio. I want to talk about spins today. Specifically, what I want to do is I want to show you how a paddle imparts spin on a ball. I want to talk a little bit about how you get spin and how you don't get spin. Let's get into it. Don't miss out on another video. Subscribe and hit the notification bell below and be the first to see our latest video. If you're not familiar with the basics of spins, topspin, underspin, and things like that, I'll link to a video above and below that you can watch before watching this video. Also, if you're not aware of how spins work on the court, in other words, what a spin will do on the court, how it bounces, I'll link to another video above and below that'll help you with that part of the process. What we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk specifically about how the paddle imparts spin to the ball, and also show you a little bit about how to do it and how not to do it. In this video, we're going to focus on the contact between the paddle and the ball. In other words, how the paddle imparts spin onto the ball. Then we're also going to talk a little bit about the type of stroke that will impart spin on the ball, and we'll talk about a type of stroke that you really should stay away from when trying to impart spin on the ball. Let me demonstrate how the paddle imparts spin on the ball. I've run a chopstick through the ball here so the ball can spin freely. From your vantage point, this would be topspin going this way because we're going over the top, and this would be underspin going on the bottom. To impart spin on the ball, I'm going to use a continental grip and an open paddle like this as I strike the ball. What I'm going to do differently between the two strokes is they're both going to have a forward momentum. My elbow and my wrist will remain constant. They'll remain in a locked, not tense, but locked position. And I'm going to execute a forward stroke or a forehand stroke onto the ball. For underspin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come through the ball like this. So I'm basically just going to go straight through it with the paddle at this angle. For a topspin, I'm going to come through it, instead of like this, I'm going to have the same paddle angle, but I'm going to come through it like this. And you'll see how each time the spin on the ball imparted by the paddle will be different. First, the underspin. So the underspin, all I'm going to do is swing like this. So as I make contact with the ball, what you can see is that the ball, as I push forward on it, the ball wants to rotate in this direction, which is what creates the underspin. The more contact I have in it, so as I hit forward and I push through it, that ball wants to spin underneath, creating underspin. Topspin is similar in that I'm going to come at it like this, but instead of coming straight across it or a little bit down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up on the paddle. So as I make contact with the ball, what I'm doing is I'm basically lifting the paddle through the trajectory that I want to hit it. So I'm not lifting it like this. I want to be clear about that. All I'm doing is lifting it up in a natural stroke mechanic. So I hit the ball, make contact with the ball, and then I come like this, and you can see how the ball wants to spin in this direction, which is where topspin is created. In a minute, I'm going to show you what not to do to generate topspin or to generate underspin on the shot. First, let me show you what to do. Let me show it to you now without the ball. I want to show you the complete motion so you can see how you can execute a stroke mechanic that imparts spin on the ball without using your elbow or your wrist and coming from the shoulder. So a spin shot would basically be an open paddle like this. Basically coming straight across like this or a little bit down is going to impart that underspin or cut shot that you're trying to execute. If you're trying to hit a topspin shot, it's going to look similar. So it's basically, I'm going to come at the ball like this, but instead of coming down or straight on the ball, I'm going to come up on the ball. Again, my elbow and my wrist are remaining constant. My shoulder is driving the action, so my paddle is going to go up. Just by lifting the paddle like this, I will basically cause that ball to spin basically end over end, if you will. So the top will go over it, and that'll generate the topspin that I'm trying to execute or I'm trying to get with my shot. Same thing on the backhand side. If I'm trying to execute a slice or an underspin on the backhand side, I'm going to come across it like this. And you'll see in the video in a minute, you'll see dinking, where basically the paddle is held like this and it's just brought straight across the ball like this without any flexion of the wrist or the elbow to generate the spin that the player is trying to generate. A backhand topspin would be similar. You'd start your swing underneath the ball and you lift up through the ball to generate the topspin on the shot. What you don't want to do, and what I see some pickleball players doing, is use the wrist or the elbow to accelerate the rotation of the paddle, because it's not necessary. If you were using your wrist, for instance, you would be turning it like this, so you'd be hitting and using the wrist. So my elbow stays constant, but my wrist turns. I could use my elbow to keep my wrist constant, would look like this, or I could do both of them. So I could do a combination of both to come across it. That is the kind of stroke that you don't want to try and hit more topspin. In a minute, I'll show you some stroke mechanics of several of the best pickleball players in the world, and you'll be able to see how they basically execute underspin and topspin shots without using their wrists or the elbow. The reason you don't want to introduce the wrist or the elbow into the shot is because it creates inconsistency. It adds another variables into your shot. It starts moving your paddle around in different angles and different ways. You want to try and have as little bit of a wrist and elbow in your shot as possible, primarily using your shoulder. That's not to say that you need to be stiff. So you don't need to hit the ball with a super stiff elbow and super stiff wrist, trying to really lock it down like this and uncomfortable. The point is that you don't want to bring them into action. So you want to try and avoid bending the wrist and bending the elbow as much as you can. It'll happen sometimes. Sometimes you may have to do it in order to get the angle you want, but most of your shots should be shoulder driven, and it's primarily shoulder driven, and have very little elbow, very little wrist in the shot. The same would be on underspins. I'll show it on the backhand side. So on the backhand side, if I start throwing my wrist into the shot, having a lot of motion like this in my spin shots, what can happen is I'm introducing, again, a higher level of variability into my shots, and I don't want that when I play pickleball. I want to be consistent. So the more that I can just use my shoulder and just bring the paddle forward like this, I'll have better shots. If I hit a topspin shot from the shoulder, my paddle's going to rotate, but it's going to rotate based on my shoulder. So basically, as I execute the shot, I come through the ball, I lift up through it. As I come out of the shot, my paddle's going to rotate through my shoulder. So I'll show it in your direction now. So if I was hitting the ball this way, I'd make contact with the ball, I come up through the ball, and as I come out of the shot, the paddle rotates around naturally, stemming or originating from the shoulder. I think the over-rotation of the paddle, so when players start rotating that paddle like this or like this, stems from a misconception, and it may stem from players who've played tennis in the past or have seen tennis players play. Tennis rackets have strings, and the tennis ball has a felt around it. So if I grab the ball with the strings and I can rotate it up, more aggressively, I will generate more spin. That's why you see, modern professional tennis players, Rafael Nadal, all of them, basically have these really exaggerated windshield wiper type motions to generate extra spin on the ball. Pickleball, you can't really do that, or at least not do it as much, because of the surfaces we play with. So we have a flat surface here, we have a hard ball, so you're not going to get the kind of spin you're thinking about by really rotating that paddle. The same thing if you compare it to table tennis. In table tennis, the paddles have that really gummy surface. You have a smaller, lighter ball, so that kind of sticks to the paddle a little bit. So if you grab that ball with that paddle and you flick it, that paddle is going to generate a lot of spin on that ball by using that wrist action, that flick action. In pickleball, really what you're counting on more just the general physics of hitting up on the ball to create topspin, hitting through the ball to generate underspin. That's the main reason why I don't recommend hitting shots like this, over rotating the paddle, because you can introduce a higher chance of error into your game.
As promised, let's look at some of the pro players. Here we have Kyle Yates and Ben Johns playing. I want to thank Pro Pickleball for the use of this video. So you're going to see basically in these strokes, we're going to break them down in a second, but you're going to see how there's a nice extended arm. You're going to see open paddle every time. You're going to see no wrist paddle rotation, and then you're going to see basically the rotation coming from the shoulder as the shot is finished. We're going to see Ben's drive here. So the drive begins with the open paddle face, which is what we talked about earlier. The topspin comes from that swing basically going up and around. So it's basically pushing that ball up. The ball will spin because he's lifting it up. Same thing here with the spin backhand by Paul Olin here. And I want to thank Eddie and Webby for letting me use this video. First, we'll look at Paul's underspin backhand shot. Then we'll look at Brian Staub's topspin backhand shot. In Paul's backhand, his arm's extended. He's following straight through that shot to get that underspin on it. There's no wrist in there. When you look at Brian Staub's backhand, what you'll notice the difference there is how Brian, after he makes contact, lifts his paddle up. But the same situation as Paul, no paddle rotation, and everything comes from the shoulder. These next dinks we're going to see from Ben Johns are basically one long dink, one short dink on the backhand side. The short dink up at the NVZ gives us a better angle. We'll break it down for you. What you're going to see here is how Ben keeps his arm extended through the shot, executes the follow through basically through the shot a little bit up because of how close he is to the net, but it's basically through the ball to generate underspin on his dink.
As you work on your stroke mechanics, try and reduce the amount of wrist and elbow that you bring into your shots. Focus on originating your shots from the shoulder, both on the backhand and the forehand side. That'll increase your consistency, generating less errors and improving your results. Good luck out there.